I started college 30 years ago, and we were learning COBOL. That's the punch cards, the little cards. Is that correct? That you fill it, you do a whole bunch of them, you punch. That's how you program the computer to. What's amazing, I'm sorry, I'm just absolutely. It kind of takes me back to the old days. My question to you is, Ms. Johns, have you guys, when you're going through this evaluation process, have you figured out, and you're trying to streamline, I know you're trying to streamline, being able to work with some of your lending partners, but how many of your lending partners out there are still using COBOL?
Actually, Chairman Graves, a number of our lending partners use COBOL. And COBOL was around when I was in college as well, which has been some time ago. However, COBOL, even though it's a time-tested computer language, it is still widely used, particularly for the kinds of operations where the SBA needs it. That is to provide the technology platform for some of our back office operations. As I'm saying, in addition to the SBA, many of our lenders use COBOL. In fact, the House of Representatives system for payroll management for members and staff uses COBOL. It is still a very widely used language. But that's just a part of our modernization efforts, COBOL that is. We also use other computer languages, Java, we use Oracle, and so COBOL is a part of a very comprehensive and complicated architecture.
I guess the question that I have, the basic question is, if you got a consultant and the consultant suggested changes, why didn't you implement? Why did you spend all those taxpayer dollars and not implement the changes? I mean, why was the money spent then?
Well, if I may, I'd like to provide a bit of context going back to, referencing back to my testimony. If you pick up this story in 2005, there was a path that the SBA was going down that was looking at a comprehensive, off-the-shelf product for basically a wholesale change-out of the loan accounting system. The agency did research, actually undertook a pilot, and what quickly was evidenced by that information was that continuing to go down that path would be more costly, more risky, and more time-consuming for the agency. And so at that point, another study was done to say, all right, what do we need to do here? And it was the results of that second study that led us to go the incremental improvement project route. And that was also substantiated by OMB, who in their statements talked about concerns about major overhaul projects and how the incremental approach was much more effective. The issues that we are trying to balance always, Chairman Graves and members of the committee, is that we don't have the luxury of just putting the agency on hold and doing a complete overhaul of the system. At one time, leaders in the agency thought that that might be feasible, but it is not. We still have a $90 billion loan portfolio to manage. We also have to implement the will of this body as a result with the Recovery Act as an example, the Small Business Jobs Act. Each of those major pieces of legislation required changes to the system, and we had to implement the modernization, manage the agency, continue to make loans to small businesses, and in fact, last year we had a record loan of over $30 billion to small businesses at a time when the economy really needed that capital to our small business job creators in the country. So those are the important issues that we have to manage: modernization, maintaining the agency, and ensuring that we're doing that having the very best use of the taxpayer dollar.
Going back to the COBOL, my staff called the lenders, your lending partners, and none of them use it for their lending practices. They may use it for other reasons or other purposes, but they don't use it for their lending practices. And if you're still using it, though, to do your lending stuff, then it's just not good.
I'm not sure
Mr.
if I may.
Chairman, if you yield,
Sure.
you may reference to the money that was given to you under the Recovery Act, right?
Chairman, I made reference to the fact that the agency was responsible for administering the Recovery Act at the same time that we were modernizing. That was the point that we have we have going concern.
And you asked for $25 million from the Recovery Act to continue to implement the modernization.
That's subject to check, but and your
Well,
question, I'm sorry.
You asked, we didn't give it to you.
All right.
The administration asked for that money for you, okay?
But if I could get back to the issue on COBOL, when you say loan practices, I'm not sure what you mean by that. 80% of our loans are managed through a web interface. So in 10 years, we've gone from 0 web presence to 80+% of our loans being managed through a web interface. So the COBOL part of our system is a relatively small part of the system, and it serves more of a back office function. And that indeed is similar to many of our lending partners.
Well, they don't. As far as the guaranteed lending goes, none of them use it for their lending practices. And real quick, Mr. Pounder, and then I'm going to turn to your ranking member Velasquez. How many of the recommendations did the SBA implement from their consulting firm?
There were, first of all, the consultant, along with others, they recommended that you take this incremental approach to focus on getting off of COBOL and the mainframe. So there's clearly where we have a start to both of those, migrating off the mainframe. And I think the desire is to get out of the COBOL world, Mr. Chairman. So those are clearly in the works. Now, the recommendations on improved governance and program management, there were clear recommendations in those two areas, and we found similar weaknesses where those two areas greatly need to be strengthened.